You started it?
Yeah.
That's good.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill Ariano from BPG Inspections, and I'm here to teach you a little bit of a class about septics and kind of how they operate and kind of what to expect, especially if you've never encountered one, or if you have encountered one, you know, some of the problems that I've seen in the field, and then maybe help you understand a little bit about doing the inspection process, and of course, a little bit about functionality and what to look out for. But before I start my class, I'm going to let our sponsor speak, our sister company, Fidelity Home Warranty. Okay, she's the one that provided lunch for us, so I'm going to let her talk to you guys first about some home warranty and some of the options there, and then we'll go into the nitty gritty.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So again, my name is Elaine Maxey. I'm with Fidelity National Home Warranty. For those of you that have never met me before, I've actually been in the home warranty industry for 11 years. I've been with Fidelity for 2 years now, and I will say I've seen a whole competitive landscape, and Fidelity does have very comprehensive coverage. I had a agent call me 2 weeks ago, and she said, you know, Elaine, I really just have not used home warranties, but I feel like I need to start using them now, right? We're becoming more of a buyer's market. And so I am seeing even listing agents reaching out to me, asking me about, you know, more about home warranty coverage, and they're even referring to the buyer. I have many listing agents calling me because sometimes, you know, with these older HVAC systems, especially. So what I'd like to emphasize today, one, the importance of a home warranty. You know, costs have gone up across the board on everything, but where I really see it is around HVAC. In the last couple of, I'd say 2 to 3 years, the cost of HVAC installations and repairs have doubled. And so, I mean, for no other reason than HVAC alone, I really think a home warranty is so important. And that's why it's so important to understand the coverage of the different companies. Fidelity does an excellent job in covering HVAC. We're one of the few companies that does not have an aggregate limit on HVAC. If you're looking, you're just comparing contract to contract. Many companies are starting to put an aggregate limit. And what that means is that during the policy period, they will only pay out to whatever that limit is. I've seen limits as low as $3,000. So just be aware of that. It's very important, and that's going to include, maybe they have 3 units. You can eat through that in no time. Another thing that's important is the AC refrigerant. We've got so many different forms of it out there now. January 1 of this year, they just put out 2 more refrigerants, and it's going to be brand independent. So great thing about Fidelity is we cover all forms of refrigerant across all of our plans at 100%. No caps, no limits. I did this little flyer here specifically for highlighting some of these things I'm talking about today. And then you'll also see on there about our no age restrictions. This is also very important. What I mean by that is some companies will not cover items that are beyond their expected life. For an AC unit, that's usually 10 years. Water heaters, 10 years. I had an agent that I talked to a couple months ago. She said, oh, Elaine, we just started doing business together. I wish I had Fidelity. She had a different company. She had had them for 5 years, placed her first AC claim, and they denied her because her system was 11 years. So just be aware of that too. That's great advice to give your buyers and sellers. I do have another flyer that lists all the different plans. And then you can always call me, text me if you have questions about that. I won't go into all the details of all the plans. I just kind of wanted to highlight, one, the importance of a home warranty and the importance of, you know, understanding the coverage. Because Fidelity does have some really excellent coverage. And not only the limits, the contract limits, but I'm also very involved. So if your clients or yourself, if you ever run into an issue with a claim, I'm happy to escalate. one of the things I like about Fidelity is I have someone on the back end that helps me, and she even tracks, like if I send her an escalation, I send her to today already. And she'll go in there, figure out what's going on and get it back on track. So many times when it comes to home warranties, it's just a matter of breakdown of communication. So my information, my contact information is there on all the flyers. Please save that. And have a question about just home warranties in general. If you need help, maybe we don't expect you to be experts on residential service contracts. So especially if it's a first time home buyer or home buyer that's not, real familiar with home warranties, I'm very happy to educate them and help them with a plan that will be best suited for their needs. Any questions, anybody?
Anybody online, questions?
I don't know this, but does Fidelity, do they cover septic? Since
Yes.
today's about septic.
Yes.
All right, all right.
We do have septic coverage. We actually have two different versions. The basic septic, and that's for grinder pumps as well. Septic, grinder pumps, injector pumps. That all comes under, it's a $75 option. And that covers the line to the septic, the pumps, and the tank itself. The second version is what we call a pump it up. And that was, and that doubles, well, it's more than double, gives you more than double the amount on that. Now that would be 150. So I would say if you have, concerns about septic, that might, the pump it up version might be one that you want to look at. I know, I can't believe it.
There you go. Well, yeah, those
Thank you for
got your
bringing
back.
that up. Yeah. So you'll notice there are options here. I have a brochure too, if you ever want a brochure, and I can send you guys these things digitally. Might make it a little easier for you, but lots of options.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
You can do the optional coverage standalone, like individual ones, or does it have to be?
No, it has to be attached to a plan. Yeah, good question. So you have to, each of these options on here can be added to one of the plans. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'll let you
All right.
take it away.
Thank you, Lane.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so once again, my name is Bill Oriano. I am a home inspector with BPG Inspections. I have to limit my talking about myself and what I do and stuff like that, and I can answer any type of questions after the class pertaining to, how often I do these and stuff like that, because I really have to kind of represent myself as an instructor today versus a home inspector. But I just want to let you know that I am an actual licensed home inspector and I do septic inspections. Okay, so I'm here, of course, everybody online, I walk around a lot. If you want to see my face on the camera, let me know and I'll stand here, but I walk around when I talk, so I'll kind of check in with everybody, and Carlin's checking, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask during the course, and I'll stop and answer any more questions. Okay. All right. So my first question is, does anybody have any negative experiences with septic? And the reason I'm gonna ask is because I would like to maybe cover those, if there's something that can be done prior, I always like to open that up, and it kind of helps with the discussion a little bit as we go through the lab. But what happened with you?
I mean, just issues with pumping,
Okay.
or you have the different alarms that actually go off with, whether it's the actual unit or whether it's the actual flow or whether it's, and then you're trying to figure it all out. Now I understand that the color system on this, when the team tells you which one it is, there's a lot of good.
Yeah, sometimes there's a red light, amber light, and stuff like that. I'll talk a little bit about that too. Anybody else? Nick, Vasquez?
Ours was installed improperly, and so our pump went out within like a year, because of that. And it was not, it was a big after, and then the pump they replaced it with also went out in a year, and so then we got a different pump.
No matter how new they are, okay, anticipate issues with septic. Okay, that's just a rule of thumb. You may hear stories like, it's under service contract, those are the worst ones. Okay, or it's brand new, or it was just pumped last month. Those type of things there, you need to kind of, we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into class, but those are just kind of little kickers there that you never want to take anything for granted when it puts out a septic. Anybody else?
Ours was, a septic that they don't make anymore. Ours had was.
Like so a traditional septic, more or less like a gravity.
It's not gravity, it's, you have the lines,
Okay.
but it's just the system itself, the way they built it.
Okay.
And so over the years, we just try to modify it to make it, so it's not so expensive.
Yeah, those are always fun to look at, those ones that are been grown together and they have a part from this, one part from this, and as an inspector, you're like, okay, those are kind of hard to deal with sometimes, because you're representing your buyer and you have to tell them, hey, this is kind of thrown together. So that would be kind of a nightmare story.
Maybe the importance of having it pumped, like how often, and the seller has no clue the last time that we've ever pumped, or if they've even never done it.
Yeah, I have a saying for that. It's always up to the seller to take all their shit with them. Okay, so, and that goes for septic, okay? So yes, I'm always, in order to get an excellent inspection, even though it was just pumped, especially if it's an older traditional system, there's really no inspection process unless it's pumped. The aerobic system, they're a little bit more forgiving. There's a lot more mechanical moving pieces that we can kind of turn on and off, check manually and stuff like that, versus a traditional gravity system that really is buried in the ground, has no moving pieces, and is just the only thing you can do is performance test it and and look at it from the outside. Unless it's empty, then you can look at the baffles, the tank condition, and all that other stuff. So with a gravity system, always pump it. Even though it was just last pump. Now sometimes you run into these situations to where it was just recently pumped, and maybe the seller doesn't want to pump it, they have it pumped again. Maybe then you have to ask the buyer, well, in order to get a good inspection, it does need to be empty. But these ones that are past due, a lot of times you can go back on the seller and say, hey, this is, it hasn't been pumped in 4 or 5 years. We would like to have it pumped since it's past due to make sure that it's no problems. Okay, and you had something, you have a rule of thumb too, right?
Well, yeah, I just bought a home and it's half the septic field was under the driveway.
Oh, yeah. Easements and all that other stuff, you never, you always, especially if there has been additions or something like that. They're not gonna move that septic, they're gonna build a driveway right up on top of it, or they're gonna put the structure. I've got in the homes before to where I'm like, well, where's the lid? I can't find it. Oh, it's in the living room. What?
No.
They built the living room right on top of it, sure enough, you go in there, they have this little wood cutout, you open it up, you're like, oh. And pumping, pumping was, because they're making it where, the footies and stuff like that, I'm like, we're gonna bring the walls into your home and pump this in your living room. So, so anytime you have additions, 2 things. Number one, yes, they can build up on top of it, or number 2, if you've added rooms to this, now maybe it has overloaded that septic system, and that septic is a little too small for what it's capable, what it was originally planned to do. So those are always questions to ask, especially if there's been renovations or additions. You always want to ask, what was the septic dealt with? And how big is it? Can it fit this? Okay. But so excellent questions there to kind of start this off. So
There are one kind of the standard, for example, for the safety that is the bed, where the side of the bed, because sometimes not appear in the story or something, and you don't know where they're feeding the area of the safety.
yeah, well, okay, so he was asking basically, what if you can't find it, right? Correct, and stuff like that. First thing that you want to do, if you're coming into a home with a septic, they're going to give you a disclosure statement, of course, on the house. But if there's a septic, you also want to look for an OSSF, on-site sewer facility sheet, okay? And that's going to tell you, that'll give you kind of an approximate location of where the septic is located, an approximate location of where the drain field is located. So you can kind of see, because a lot of times you can conquer these problems right at the very beginning. You may have a client that wants to build on in the backyard, put a garage back there, but that's all drain. So if you already know that there's a drain field back there, you're not gonna be able to build on top of it. So that might kill the deal right there before you even go into the inspection process and pay, $500 to have it inspected, another $300 for septic evaluation, and then find out, wait a minute, this is not gonna work, I can't build that. Okay, so having that OSSF is very important, and that will help with proximity and stuff like that. Now, as far as permits and all that stuff go, I don't know how they get away with it sometimes as far as the permitting goes, if they're doing expansions and they're putting driveways on top of septics and all that other stuff, but it happens. Okay, but anytime, those are definitely questions that you want to ask, and of course, some septics you can't see, sometimes the gravity systems, you can't see where they're located unless it's a clean out. Some of the older systems don't have cleans, so you look at those dome lids, and if they don't have a dome lid, and you're dependent on that OSSF. So I've always, my rule of thumb is, if you got one under contract, the first thing that you're gonna ask for is that OSSF, confirm that it's there. Second is when it's pumped, so that way you already know, hey, should I do a quick auction here? Or should I, maybe do a full 10 days, because I'm gonna have to arrange septic and pumping and get the inspector there, and those maybe are the ones that you wanna do like a 3-day auction. Yeah, you kind of burn. Part of that.
But if you need pumps again, like if the seller just pumped like 3 weeks ago, does it need to be pumped again for the inspection?
Depending on, it all depends on what kind of notes that you have. If it's a traditional gravity system, again, I can't look at it, I can't see inside the tank, and with a traditional system, 90% of the inspection is inside that tank. And then, it's already filled up, and somebody's already gone to the restroom, and somebody's already done their laundry and stuff like that, so again, those valves are covered and stuff like that, and not only that, but you can't leave a septic tank and the system empty, because it loses that resistance and it can cause a change to cracks, and usually when you have those pumped, you have to fill them up right away. So the question there would be, well, you may not be able to get the seller to pay for this, so you'll have to ask the buyer, well, how much are you in love with this home? And how much risk are you taking, because you're gonna have to totally end up paying for this out of your pocket in order to have it pumped, since they just recently had it done. And of course, obviously, if it's never been pumped, you gotta drive it since 10 years, then you're worried about negligence at that point. So, that right there, so I don't know which is more, worrisome, the negligence part has never been pumped in 10 years, or, they're having to pump it again because it was just recently pumped. But for peace of mind, if you have a traditional gravity, 100% you want to always have it pumped, especially if you don't have good notes. Sometimes you'll have good notes, it was just pumped last week or 3 weeks ago, and they have it documented on there that there was no cracks in the tank. Okay, well, maybe from there, okay, since you have that documentation, the risk factor kind of goes down again. Again, we can't give them that peace of mind. We're going based off of what this receipt says. Again, you still want to have a pump if you can, but if money, if they're not wanting to fork over that money, then ask for documentation, maintenance requests. You got somebody that has religiously been pumping these things every 3 years or so, then hey, probably gonna be okay. But again, you got that one that hasn't been pumped in 5-10 years. You get more, just anticipate maybe a septic replacement at that point, especially if it's an older one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so go on here. So when stuff happens, obviously, that's what we're gonna go into here today. We're gonna talk about what the septic system is, the types, how they work, and what maintenance is required. How often should we pump? When should they be pumped? Because aerobics, don't need to be pumped as often as what gravity does. Traditional gravities are typically every 3 years. Okay, aerobics are pretty much every 5 to 7, and that all depends on family size and stuff like that. You can have a traditional with maybe like a senior couple in there, but those are important too, because chemicals inside the septic, you can't have too much. And what happens sometimes with seniors, they take a lot of medication. Okay, so they're using that septic, and then when it comes out of their body, you've got all this stuff that's going into the septic that can cause an issue with bio. Okay, so even though you hear, it's just a senior couple, they're barely do that, red flag. Okay, so we need that means we need to pump. Okay, or we need to at least open the lids up to inspect inside it. Okay. So, yeah, so basically you can, you can tell, better coach your buyer on what to do, because like I said, these septics. That they can burn, in the very beginning, you need to know this before you figure out what your option is. Okay. So, couple of issues there, how they work, septic and leach fields, okay, we're gonna talk about that. Where it flows into a two-chambered system, okay, so basically they flush. They're typically go into this tank right here. Okay, this is gonna be a traditional system, okay, now there's really no electrical components here. You flush, goes into this very first tank here, and then you can see that there's a little divider there. Okay, so what happens is the sludge kind of goes into the first tank, goes to the bottom, and then the effluent starts to kind of rise up, the gray water. And then the gray water will go into here, so you'll have the deposits in here, gray water in here, and as this starts to rise, and this kind of comes out into the leach field and goes into the soil and it's kind of, and it filtrates through there. So what can happen here if you got lack of maintenance, okay, is that, let's say for instance, you got a traditional and you ask when it was pumped, you don't know. Maybe the homeowner died, it's a mistake, you don't know. So then again, the alarms are kind of going off, because what can happen with these systems is that this overloads and the solids, it fills up this entire tank and then they start coming into here. And then this starts to fill up and then we get solids into the drain field, okay? And once we get solids in here, that's when it becomes very costly to fix. Because now we're talking about excavation, we're talking about having to clean those lines out. We might even have to kind of build a mound system on top of that, because this leach field is not, it's not gonna keep any more in. Okay, so that's the severity when we'll run into issues with traditionals as far as the lack of maintenance. It can be very, very costly. The other thing that can happen is that you have all of these deposits in here. So what happens when you have poop in a confined space for a long time? What develops? Methane. Okay, so methane is very bad for concrete. So what can happen here is your tank lids up here, they start to deteriorate. Okay, and they start to flake. And then of course, then you get this driveway. We put a new driveway. This is already deteriorating. Let's go ahead and put a driveway on top of it and let's drive our car on top of the septic tank.
I had a bobcat fall into a septic tank on my listing once. They were doing work on the hillside and he ended up like literally.
Wow, yeah, it happens. I was inspecting one time and it was buried and I was kind of digging it. And I noticed that when I finally got the list, I noticed it was concave. And I was over here standing right on top of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing here could just kind of fall out. I'm gonna take
You're gonna take a swim?
yeah. That's what I did. I don't think people are gonna want me going in their house after that. Okay, but you have a leach field, okay, and these are generally older, okay? And sometimes too, when you run into these, especially septics that were maybe built in the 80s, they're not gonna permit this anymore. Okay, they're not, if you need a new septic, they're probably not going to allow you to come in with a traditional system anymore. They're gonna probably want you to advance to aerobic. Because of the environment, the processing and all that other stuff. So factor all of that stuff in there when you run into these older septics, or where they're at, are they still permitting to have this traditional fluid? Okay, because you could be looking at major stuff here in the event that you have to replace that. Okay, these are starting to kind of go away slowly, but they are still out there. Okay, especially in your more rural areas. There are also some areas in Austin, but Austin is pretty much annexing, like on Toledo Road, there's by the golf course, there's homes there that are on septic still, but the city's coming in and they're not permitted anymore. They're having basically fill the septics and go to the city walls. But we're still running into these out in the field. Okay, and these are the ones that are probably going to give you the most headache, especially if there's no maintenance involved. And sure enough, these are the ones that are typically neglected the most. Yeah, so got a gravity traditional has been pumped, no 3-day ops on that one. Okay, if you want to get as much ops time as you can on that. Okay, and that's why you always ask up front when it was a pump, OSS, get your home, get your ducks in a row before that happens. People online, are they able to see the?
Yeah, I'm gonna hide you.
Okay.
There we go.
Perfect, okay. All right, so, basically pumping, usually in the rural areas is where you're gonna find the old areas is where you're gonna find these gravities, okay? And you're usually gonna find the septics in the rural areas where there's no city offerings as far as any, for food and stuff like that. So usually out of the country or something like that in estates, usually about an acre property, you're not gonna have city service there, so that's why you're doing this, okay? And of course, the importance of the septic is the treatment of the wastewater from homes or businesses, that effluent can be discharged back into the environment without issue. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the different types. Right now, we just talked about one with the leach field, where it kind of goes into the environment or into the ground, and it just kind of filtrates through there. And by the time it travels down about 20 feet or so, it's already, the water's already kind of clean and stuff like that, as it enters the ground. We have others that are treatment aerobics, to where they're treated with bleach tablets, chlorine tablets, and you have a distribution of sprinkler system. Okay, that does it. We'll get into that here in a little bit as well. Okay, so technically septic refers to an anaerobic system, okay, that uses bacteria that does not require oxygen. Okay, that's what I was telling you here earlier, that with people flushing stuff down the toilet, too much bleach products or something like that, that can affect and kill that good bacteria that septics need, that thrive on to kill off the bad stuff. Okay, with an aerobic system, you are pumping oxygen into that. You got a little pump in there, and it's actually pumping air into that, and it helps. But with an anaerobic system, there is no air supply going in there, so it's dependent on that bacteria that develops to kill off the bad stuff. Okay, so basically a rule of thumb on septics, and this is really even with an aerobic system, you want, because you really become an environmentalist, people know, septic is if it doesn't come out of your body, it doesn't go into the septic. Okay, now that's why garbage disposal aren't recommended for septic, because vegetables take a long time to process or deteriorate. And so when you have a garbage disposal and you're grinding that stuff down and it goes into the septic, well, they're gonna decompose it there. They're gonna produce a lot more of that bad bacteria that kills off the good stuff that we need in there. So usually with the traditional system, if there is a garbage disposal, that's going to be a red flag that will point out. You'll recommend garbage disposal. You have one, that's fine, but you want to use it very sparingly. Just you don't want to pour all the food or the gunk in there and dry it all down. You want to probably dump some in the trash and then rinse it out, and there's a little bit of buildup, and then you go from there. Okay, but the liquid waste floats to the top. The wastewater filters out into the soil. You pump the waste of the flood to the top. Okay, and then the effluent, the gray water, once you factor out all the solids, that goes into the earth and eventually it's kind of filters through there. Okay, and the most familiar is the passive system with the septic tank D-box and absorption leach field. Now, of course, that's with a gravity system. Now, they do have the low dose pressure with an aerobic that will still pump it up there, and those are the advanced type. But the majority that, like I said, these are starting to these are the most familiar. These are the ones that are actually starting to kind of go away. Any questions so far? Okay. So various types: septic tank to soil absorption trenches. Okay, those are your traditional. Those are the ones that pretty much have no mechanical, electrical stuff. You flush and gravity takes over. Okay, goes into that tank, goes into the leach field, and they're kind of angulated down so that way they drain away from the home into the field and stuff like that. These you want to kind of be a little bit careful. You want to overload the system. If you have a client that's going to buy one of these, and let's say for instance, the septic is okay, you probably don't want to do all the laundry on a Sunday. If you 10 loads of laundry on a Sunday, then you're going to shock that system. You want to distribute your laundry, if the load here, load there, load there, especially if you want to do the dishwasher and all that other stuff. Okay, so you have to kind of be a little bit meticulous, or coach your buyers on that, not to do all the laundry. Septic tank pre-treatment to absorption trenches. These are the ones that, as the gravity system, you have chlorine tablets. So before they go into it, they're being treated with chlorine, especially if there's an aerating system or a sprinkler system. So you're not pumping like raw sewage out there, at least it's treated. Okay. Pre-treatment low pressure pipe. Okay, these are the ones that's a little bit more expensive because you don't have the sprinkler system out there. Because a lot of times people don't like it. You have to have a large area of land on there. You don't want to be spraying out of your house or into the neighbor's yard or anything like that. So the low dose is probably one of the better ones, but it's going to be more expensive to have. Okay, sand mound systems. Which, if you ever go to a home, and you see this big dome in the backyard. Okay, that is usually because of the fact that the soil is not very absorbent, or they had a problem with the initial leach field there, and they had to build this big dome because there was not a lot of room in there to put in another leach field. Okay, I went to one time. This was when I first started doing septic. So I went to there, and there was this big mound. You open up the back door, like, what's that? It was killed in this little backyard. And of course, I climbed to the top and I could see some erosion that was happening. It was bleeding off. It was still going into the neighbor's yard. But the problem was that since the mound was built up, when the rain was coming in, it was eroding it down. They weren't taking care of the grass and stuff like that on the top. So whenever it would pump into there, it'll kind of leach out into the neighbor's yard and stuff like that. Drip distribution systems, and then of course spray irrigation systems. Okay, those are with an older traditional system, you're not going to run into the spray irrigation. Okay, those are going to be technically an aerobic system that if they have a sprinkler system involved. Okay, because again, you need to have power in order to activate a sprinkler system. With a gravity or traditional, there is no power. Okay. Gravity itself. Okay. So sprinkler systems, here we go again, kind of talking about how they, where you get the riser, flush. Of course, you see a well. Okay, that would be another kind of thing to kind of watch out for, because obviously we're not wanting to pump our well water or we're draining our septic. Even though, yes, the earth is filtrating and stuff like that, there are proximity rules, okay, involved there. The well itself from the drain field has to be at least 100 feet away from where the drain field is located, and of course it has to be 50 feet away from where the risers or the tank is. Okay, so sometimes when you run into these issues, or if they just put a well in there, and it's potable water drinking, and if it's just for irrigation purposes and it's not drinking water, then you can really go violation. But if you know that that is potable water, there's a septic picture. It's got a proper proximity. Okay.
You said 100 feet of drain field and 50 feet from.
Yeah, so from the well to here is 100 feet distance. To the tank is 50 feet. Okay. And as you can see, the drain field, this is kind of the process as it reaches into the environment there, how it's treated. Okay, so you can see eventually how this drain field can become expired. Okay, because it's going to reach its maximum of absorption rate. You typically 30 to 40 years, and then that's whenever you'll start building a dome on top of that, or very expensive. You come in and excavate all that dirt. You come in with more dirt. Okay, very expensive. So
Or relocated if you've got.
or relocated. Yeah, you've got another area. Or sometimes too, like on this distribution D box, you'll have two areas that you can drain to. You've got a valve. Every 6 months, you'll turn it and it'll drain to this side, and then you go there, turn the valve, and drain to this side. A little bit good to have to hold on to the life of the septic, because it gives it time to cover itself. Okay. Mound system, there we go. Okay, we had to build on top of it. Okay, so these are, just because it has a mound doesn't necessarily mean that it was an issue with the drain field at one time. It could have been like I said, in this yard, they didn't have a lot of area there for it to have a huge drain field, so they had to build this mound in the backyard. Or if you have very tight, dense soil, then you're gonna have a mound system. Okay, but that's just basically above the ground. And of course, obviously on these, if you ever kind of walk around, you don't want to see any of these pipes, because that's what I ran into. Is that erosion had transpired up on the very, very top, and those pipes were exposed. So what was happening there is that instead of being an absorption field, it was an evaporative field. Okay, and you can't have that. It needs to go down, not up. Okay. Any questions? You good?
Never seen one of those.
Yeah, they're not very common, but they are out there. And in Texas, our soil is pretty good, you know, to have a leach field. These are kind of more like up north that you're gonna see a lot of these and stuff like that, or in tighter neighborhoods with no city service, and you don't have a giant steel mattresses. Okay, not very common here in our area, but the reason I bring this up is because just in case you walk in there, you're like, what is that big mountain? You're gonna know all that, that's what it's leaching to. Okay, so septic tank, first stage purpose, separate waste into 3 layers. You got your scum layer, which is on the top, you got your clear zone, and then you got your sludge. Okay, now what we're trying to pump in, or what we're draining into the leach field, is your clear zone. That's the stuff that's in the middle. Okay, so your sludge deposits are gonna go to the bottom, the scum layer is gonna go to the top, and in the middle here, you've got that stuff there that's pretty much gray water, and that's the stuff that you want going into the absorption field or irrigating out into the yard. Okay, now what happens with lack of maintenance is this, you know, you got your sludge, you got your scum, and then you got your, you know, your gray water, but eventually it's going to meet. Okay, and once it meets, there's nothing to pump other than solids. And that's the thing that you're trying to keep out of the drain fields, is those solid deposits. Because once you get solids into the drain field, now, you know, part of what we're talking big bugs, okay, potential field busters. And that's why what's that?
Man, very bad.
Yeah, so, you know, that's why that's why it's always really important to know about the maintenance before you go into these, because, you know, if you've got that older system, there's a lot of lack of maintenance there, and you might as well just kind of factor in $20,000 into maybe a potential septic replacement. And if there's a drain field on top of that, that may be, you know, compromised, and that's another addiction from the past. Okay, so that's what I'm saying, you know, people will, you know, this, why waste their time, but if they're not interested in maybe doing some major work to the septic, you know, but be frank, you know, shake hands with somebody, it's our water. Okay, here's a little bit better of a picture of what happens. This is a different type of septic here. So here, remember I was telling you about the effluent in the middle, okay? Scum layer on the top, sludge, inlet, your flushing kind of comes in here. The separation process takes place. This drains into here. Sometimes you'll have a filter and then the outlet. So remember, when these two here squeeze together, now you're pumping in solids into that's going to get into there. That's why it's very important to pump these systems at least every 3 years. Okay, if you have a bigger family, sometimes more. If you have teenagers, they like that McDonald's and like that Sonic, that kind of food, there's a little bit hard to process. Okay, so you're pumping that septic with even, you know, more bad stuff in there. That's not going to be good for that. It's going to produce that bad bacteria. Okay. All right, so the scum layer on the top basically consists of your oils, grease, and fats. Okay, so oil or grease is an enemy to a septic system. Okay, because it doesn't break down. Okay, like we're putting processed food stuff that comes out of our body that breaks down a lot faster because it's been processed. Unprocessed foods like stuff in the disposal. That is going to produce a lot of this as well. Okay, but we've been to septics to where we're pumping and there's just big clumps of grease coming. Okay, to where maybe this buyer didn't know they were supposed to pump grease into there or rinse the plates out of it, dump the grease into the drain. In the city, even though we're not supposed to, but it's a little bit more forgiving because it goes away from us and we don't really have to worry about it. In a septic, it goes no further than that tank. Whatever you put in that tank, it's with you still, it may be out of your house, but you still gotta deal with it because it's sitting in this tank. So, you don't wanna have a thick scum layer on top. Okay, and usually what we'll do when we go in there and we probe these septics, we open them up, we call a sludge good. And we go in there, we will poke it in there and we measure the amount of sludge that's in there. And if it's excessive, then we know that there's definitely a lot of things going on there. Which could be lack of pumping, you know, they're not paying attention to what's being pumped in there or put in there.
There's a thick layer of scum, but your sludge is okay. And can they just take that top layer off or will?
No, when you're pumping, you pump the whole thing. Because there could be, if you get in there and you have sludge deposits on the bottom, okay, or, you know, but you don't have a scum layer on the top, but you have sludge, that could be bad too, because then that means chemicals have been being pumped into there, so there may be some bacteria buildup there, as far as that goes. Okay, I've run into these before where they're orange. Okay, and orange, when you fall in love there, orange is bad, that means that somebody used to have like a crack house and they were flushing that. Usually if you have an orange septic, you have to notify authorities. Doesn't happen often, but some of your desolate houses way out there that maybe have been vacant for a while, you run into that. Okay, that's a deal with it obviously too, run into that orange stuff in there. Okay. Clear zone in the middle, of course, this is what we want to be pumping out into those absorption fields. 75% of solids will separate in a well-functioning tank. Many newer tanks have the 2 chambers. Some of the older tanks have just a 1 chamber. Of course, I was showing you the picture of the 2-chamber tank, but the older ones, it's dependent. You flush in there, it's just off because of the baffles. And those are the ones that are very, very important, you know, you're to pump out. Still out there, but you know, you're not gonna get one of those permanent anymore. The 1 tanks are pretty much gone. So the second chamber is basically kind of like an additional place where it can separate to protect that absorption field from being infiltrated with solids. So I think so far you guys realize the importance of pumping, right? Okay, so that's why that's a very, very important question to ask. The first question to ask, when was it pumped? Just remember that. If you can remember that, when was it pumped? You're gonna save yourself a lot of headache. Okay, when it comes down to figuring out how much oxygen you're gonna do on this. Sludge layer at the bottom, okay, toilet paper, feces, of course, other solids. Okay, now, hygiene products, you don't want to put in the septic either, because those go down to the bottom. Okay, those are not going to deteriorate. So you're just basically filling up your septic with solid stuff that's never going to deteriorate, which is going to require a lot more pumping. And when the septic people get there, there's a lot of products in there. They may charge extra because that's not good on their impellers. That's not good on their stuff there. It takes them a little bit extra, you know, and they may come up to you and say, hey, I know that we quoted you $500 to pump this, but there's so much stuff in there. I'm going to do an additional $200 for this. Okay. So this is where you're, you know, maybe putting something, if you've ever been to somebody's house, and sometimes people put, you know, do not flush products, you know, female hygiene products on the toilet, don't flush this down the toilet, you know, stuff like that, because they're being, you know, they're being kind of aware, you know, hey, you know, say, you know, help save our subject here. Okay. Gray water would include the laundry water, bath water, sink water, etc. Older homes with basements, baths, laundry with direct discharge. You know, this used to be the case. Okay, they can't do this anymore. But in some of your older homes, you used to be able to go out there and you could see that. Like I would run into this a lot with mobile homes, to where you could see the wash machine, and they just have they're just draining to the outside. Okay, into a swell or something like that. Can't do that anymore. Now you have to drain into the septic. And of course, now these require, the ones that are in the basement, they will require a lift pump to get them up there, because again, gravity, you gotta get it up before it can go down again. So if there, you know, typically you got some stuff in the basement there, which we don't really have a lot of basements here. All right. Of course, you know, this is where I would see, you know, drink. This is where it's common to drain wash machines into, or bath waters, and find people that would want to put bath water in there. But now it's required. Things, the type of drainage that does not go into the septic. would be, water. I'm sorry, water softener. Okay, those have to be, whenever they go through the regeneration system and they do the backwash, you cannot put that backwash into the septic, that has to be drained to the external, because that has a lot of salt content. So if you run into a situation like that, that'll mess up that bacteria in there and cause some issues as far as you've got a lot of salt content in there.
It'll also kill your pump.
Yep, sure will. And salt is bad for it. Chlorine, okay, from swimming pools, you don't want to have any backwash in there either. Okay. And of course, here's some good information for you here too. 1,000-gallon tank, you'll get this on the OSSF. Okay, so if you have any remodels and stuff like that, you can ask them, hey, 3-bedroom home, typically you want about 1,000-gallon tank, okay? 1,500-gallon tank for 5-bedroom, for, at least a 5-bedroom home. Okay, so you got a 3-bedroom home, you did an addition, you added on 2 bathrooms, or you added on a bathroom and, an extra 2 bedrooms there, but it's still got that 100,000-gallon tank. Okay, that's an issue. Okay, it's too small. Okay, and of course, with the amount of occupants in the home as well. Okay, so you got a large family in there,
Couldn't you just have that 1,000-gallon tank be pumped more frequently, or if there was?
Yeah.
5 people?
you can.
But if you're representing a buyer.
Mhm.
so-
Yeah, so you gotta cover your bases there because we don't do that. And-
Yeah.
Now there's stuff in my house.
Yeah, so all of a sudden,
I don't
that
want that.
becomes your problem now, okay, you don't want that, so. Cover your bases there, so that way they don't. You didn't know. And happens, okay. General maintenance, consider septic tank to be a very large, expensive appliance. And it is, because people don't like putting money into their septic tank, okay, they just don't like it, and that's why we run into issues even with brand new septics. Okay, like I said, just because it's brand new and just because it's under a maintenance contract means absolutely nothing. Okay, and of course, under maintenance contracts, like I said, now not all of them, but the majority of them, the guy just comes up there with a clipboard and he's just checking things off. I don't know how many times I've been to a septic to inspect it, and I could see where they little punched off a little number there, that they were just there a month ago. The filter's dirty, and there's issues with the floats, they're disconnected, or just kind of, floating around in there. This stuff costs the septic company money because they're under that maintenance contract, but they don't want to kick it out. Okay, so I come in there and catch them. And and a lot of times the seller's like, what? It was in their maintenance contract. What do you mean? That can't happen. Okay. And of course, best maintain average. Of course, yes, it should be pumped every 2 to 3 years, depending upon load. Now, of course, that's with your gravities. Your aerobics are a little bit more forgiving. Okay, now when they're 3 to 5, comes up to 7, depending on the family size. Okay, and of course, best to maintain average in this approach, no overloading. You need to monitor or eliminate the use of harsh chemicals, okay, bleach products especially, okay, you don't want to be draining all that into the septic. Okay. If you wouldn't ingest it, your septic tank shouldn't either. Okay, so telling you basically, the general rule of thumb, if it doesn't come out of your body, it doesn't go to the septic. And of course, best not to use the garbage disposal, mainly because veggies take a very long time to break down. Okay. Of course, we're talking about the driveway. Top of the drain field. Okay, we don't want to do that. Those leach rods compress, they're not load bearing. Okay, leach field is more expensive to deal with than the tank, because that requires excavation, that requires bringing in dirt. That stuff's very expensive to deal with. Okay, trees around the septic or around the drain field are very harmful as well, just like trees around a structure, because the roots get up in there, and it's no different with the septic. Tree roots are going to get into that tank, and even though that tank is sealed, you got that lid, the concrete lid that goes up on the top of it, those tree roots are still infiltrated. You got a little hairline bracket, and I don't know, I've seen several of these, you get them pumped out, there's big fat roots on the bottom of the tank. To where it was, one time it was just a little, just a little tiny root, but now it's expanded into a bit bigger, you crack the tank and they're leaking and stuff like that. And you find those on things that haven't been pumped in a long time, okay, because you got that sludge layer on the bottom there that's covering all this stuff. Okay, that's why it's important to pump. Especially whenever you're inspecting. Don't overload the commode, okay, flush diapers, wipes, or other items. Also, if you have, especially with septics with a leach field, if you have a leaky pipe or a running toilet. Okay, I was telling you, like, don't overload it by doing too many, loads of laundry that day, but if you have a toilet that's constantly running or a pipe that's dripping, well, it's not going any further than the septic. It's not like it's going into the city lines and you're never gonna see it again, it goes no further than your home. So that is constantly charging that drain field as well, and it doesn't let it recover. Okay. Of course, your well, you want to take care of proximity issues. And of course, on your sink, limit the use of garbage disposal and avoid pouring fats, grease, solids, harsh chemicals down the drain. Okay. Remodels for the septic. Painters, they don't know. They don't know sometimes that it's on septic and they're washing the brushes. New construction was septic. Okay, it's brand new, you're just buying the home. But you got that painter in there and didn't know, they're only washing the paintbrushes, you got paint already inside the septic, brand new home, it happens. Okay, so should you have a brand new home inspected for septic? Yeah. Because that happens, first thing to ask your builder, hey, are your painters aware that they can't wash your brushes? So they're like, yeah, let me call my inspector. Because nobody's observing that, nobody's tracking it. And so things that happen, new construction that happens, okay? We're gonna talk about symptoms. We talked about this one here a lot, the septic tank, the absorption field, a gravity system. Traditional, older, starting to become a little bit more obsolete now. Okay, everybody is one, they're not, a lot of areas are not permitting these anymore because they're gonna want you to convert to aerobic. If you're buying that 80s home, original septic tank, that thing is about ready to expire, maybe it's working properly or not. Maybe that buyer needs to know that, hey, even though it's working right now, you're on limited time. And you're probably not going to be able to buy this type of septic again, you're gonna probably have to.
How much of an upgrade is that, like,
15 to 20,000.
from my gravity or?
And now that's just the tank. If you have to do drain field work, that's an additional potentially 15. Okay. So, of course, you may have to convert to mound or, maybe irrigation, especially if the ground can't take a drain field anymore, you may have to put, if you have the room, you may have to put sprinklers. Tank itself, here's kind of different type of tanks, you got concrete, you got fiberglass tanks. And this is a distribution box. Basically with this is kind of a coming in from the septic tank, drains into that D box there. And of course, you got a drain field running this way, and you got a drain field running this way. It's a shared system. Sometimes you have a valve in there that you can alternate. We'll talk about that you can recharge the system, and then sometimes it just kind of disperses and you go into the bowl. Okay, but that should be on your oil system as well. That has a D box or anything like that. That oil system tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Some of them are very, now, not all OSSs are the same. Okay, some of them are, there's a lot of link boxes and stuff like that, so sometimes I thought it's not, even though they should be your saving rates, sometimes they're very scarce and they don't have the information. Okay. I don't know what an absorption field looks like in construction. Okay, and under each one of those, you have the distribution rods. Okay, brings them in slowly, put the dirt on top of it. Okay, you should never see anything percolating out of the top. If you're ever touring a home with a client, And you know where that, you know, typically you're gonna know where that absorption field is, because everything's gonna be lush green. Okay, it'll be kind of dead here and very green over here, okay? But if you're touring that area and you see some palms or some like wet spots in there, red flag. Okay, because then it's not absorbing, it's surfacing for pond. Okay, that's a major deficiency as well. You don't want to see any surfacing, finding wet spots or anything like that. No tackle football in that area. Okay, no kids can't play there, nothing like that. You know, and of course, very lush areas, cattails growing. You know, the grass is, you know, this high. That means more than likely there's some surfacing and planting going on. So very lush green fields of that. This is that, because you don't want all that roots in there either. Okay, but typically you'll get the cattails growing whenever you have on or anything like that that's going on. Right. It's okay to see some little green vegetation, maybe a little bit higher grass if you wanted to see it, you want to jungle dance on. Aerobics, okay. So here now we're getting into the newer type of stuff. Okay, this is what we're this is a better system to have. It's like a little mini treatment sewage system. Okay. So you get your pre-treatment to soil absorption, which includes a mechanical treatment device, either an air, an impeller, sometimes both. And of course, it further aerates the effluent before discharging into the absorption area. So you've got this little pump that's like one of those. I always use the analogy of the fish tank pump for your, you know, it's pumping all that those bubbles in there, the aeration. It's the same type of pump, pretty much. You're pumping that into the septic, and you're just pumping all of that oxygen in there, and to kind of help the bacteria growth in there. Of course, you got an impeller to, you know, kind of grind up the solids and kind of get in there, and then liquefy them a little bit. Okay, so these are like a little mini treatment area. Okay, a lot better to have. Okay, here's that air pump. Because you should always hear it, and you'll know that it's an aerobic because it has power to it, or it'll be a low dose pressure. You'll know it's not a traditional if it has got electrical components involved. Okay, so that's always kind of a plus. So either look for the access risers. If you're going into a home, you're not too sure, you don't have that OSSF sheet yet, and you don't really see those green risers, or you don't see anything around there that indicates that there's a septic, then you can probably maybe assume that it's going to be traditional. But if you have those green risers, or if you see like the red lights, or you can see that something is actually plugged into the septic, then you can probably assume that it's either going to be an aerobic or it's going to be an advanced type of septic system in there. Okay. So here these work a little bit better. You got your inlet. You're still dealing with sludge layers on the bottom, you're still dealing with your scum layers and stuff like that. But you can see where the pump is pumping that oxygen into that tank there, kind of churning it a little bit. And you can see that here's where the breakdown process is. And then this kind of goes up into here into the effluent. This is what we want going into the environment here. And then anything heavy is being pumped into the sludge tank right there. Okay, so you can see obviously even here, see you got the breakdown process, so it's going to take a lot longer for it to build up here and start pumping stuff into that outlet. These are a little bit more forgiving, but they're not bulletproof. Okay, they still need to be pumped, not as often, but in order for inspection purposes, you know, we can only see when we're doing an inspection, we can only see this area of the tank here. We can't see down here. And these are still susceptible to cracks, especially if you have a lot of trees, lush, stuff like that. They can cause cracks or, tanks to shift. We can't see any of that.
Can you explain what that baffle part is?
So the baffle, what that is that remember we're after the stuff that's in the middle. Okay. So what the baffle does is as the solids start to rise, it keeps them out of this area here. Okay, so you're just getting the stuff that's in the middle. But baffles become obsolete as the sludge crosses that area. Okay, as it starts to you lose that middle ground. Okay, So that's the purpose for a baffle, that's why you have that, goes down a little bit lower, and obviously it goes higher there. It's trying to keep us, the whole purpose for a baffle is to keep the solids out. And to pump what's in the middle, out into the distribution. Very common too, those baffles that come apart, and we'll open up the septic, and we'll see this part of the baffle laying on the bottom. And that's why it's also important to pump, because that will be a deficiency that we call it, that can be repaired, that's an easy call out. But that needs to be fixed, because the whole thing is that you're protecting that leach field. Okay, because there's a lot of involved there. Any questions? Okay. Here is this would be a low dose pressure. Okay, so when we run into this, even though there's no sprinkler heads involved here, we still have a leach field, but this is an aerobic system. Okay, these are going to be a little bit more expensive to do, because you don't have to deal with the sprinkler heads. You're still dealing with a leach field, which is a little bit more convenient, but you don't have to deal with the sprinkler head system. Okay, but this would be an aerobic system with it would be called a low dose, which is called a low dose pressure, but it's still technically the lower. Okay, because even though it doesn't have the sprinkler heads, but again, you've got the 3 tanks, you have the treatment. So as long as you've got, especially if you've got 3 lids showing, and you've got a power supply, you can see it's the lowest. Okay. Drip distribution systems are shallow install design. That's why they're a little bit more expensive. They are a pressurized system. They're utilized on challenging sites, smaller, tighter areas, or if you just don't want to deal with sprinkler heads. There's usually at least 2 absorption zones, whether they distribute evenly or you have a jammy valve that opens and closes and you change the distribution. They do require an ongoing service contract, which really means nothing. Just because, like I said, just because they have a service contract means nothing. Okay, and they are one of the most expensive on-site systems. Yeah, because of the convenience factor. Okay, so it's a drip system.
And isn't it the county that requires that?
Yeah, some counties, that's why a lot of them are, when you go get the permit, if you're trying to get a traditional system, they're gonna say, you're getting one of these. Yeah, and a county can say, hey, you cannot have sprinkler heads in this area here, it has to be this here too, so yes, it can be a county, and that's where we want to kind of check to see what the permitting, especially if you know that you're gonna end up having to replace that septic, you may want to, check with the county and see what the permitting for. Okay. So here's basically a setup there. Still, you've got proximity issues from the well. Swimming pools, obviously, pools are the same thing. We don't want the drain field next to a pool for obvious reasons. Go in there and the swimming pool's a little brown. You get a crack in the pool and you're leaching into that area. Don't want that. Okay, but here's basically a schematic of a drip system. Okay, and like I said, these are the more convenient ones to have. A little bit more expensive, obviously. Okay, but this is like the king of septic, right?
And none of that drip tubing was visible. Right?
No, all buried. But again, if you know that it's low dose drip and you're touring with your client and you got these unexplained wet spots or you got some ponding going on, that would be real. You know that you're gonna want to have it. I'm not saying that those are a deal killer, but if the client is thinking, I need to have the septic check, it's 2 years old, then you're gonna tell your client, there's ponding, we need to have this inspected, there's money involved here to get this fixed. Not the end of the world, but there's money associated with this to get it fixed. Okay, and like I said, I've seen surfacing ponding, I've seen exposed pipes on new construction. Okay, where those leach water are exposed, they need to be 6 inches underground. This is on new construction. Okay, so you should never see any part of the leach rods at all. That is totally wrong. You see that. Okay. Kind of a little, here's your mound system, which you still can have with a low drip system. Obviously, if you have soil that is very compacted or dense, Okay, but you can see how you would need a pump for it to, pump upwards into that mound, or if you're in the basement. Okay, there. It's kind of a, there's a mound right there, so if you ever see something like that, there's a septic associated with it. Probably be pretty much sure, that's not, that's man-made, that's not a natural environmental thing there, okay? There's not an alien coming out from underneath the ground or anything like that, in the movies, okay, that would be a mound system. Okay. And that's what I saw in this guy's backyard. It wasn't just this big, but it was that obvious, and you go by there, what the heck is that big? Okay, now, spray irrigation system is a cheaper alternative. On lots with challenging topography, or trench system can't be utilized, okay? Freezing issues, okay? And of course, this would also require a continual service contract, okay? Now, again, if you have the land for these and stuff like that, then this is definitely a cheaper alternative to go with. But, if you're kind of, like, I did one in Dripping Springs the other day, and it was on maybe a 3/4 lot, and they had 3 sprinkler heads there. But I mean, they had one that was, it was just spraying the master, it was a beautiful home, I don't know how the homeowner didn't know this, but it was spraying the window to the master bedroom. And she was an agent on top of that, she was a listing agent selling her home. I had to go in there and say, did you know that your home is being sprayed with septic? I see that, I don't normally disclose, but in this case, because I had to go there and tell us, look. The windows was just all like.
Can they put guides on those like they do with sprinklers?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, cause in Hayes County, you have to have a maintenance contract, right, and register, so like when ours come out, we adjust our guides all the time, like whoever was doing the contract never thought to.
Like I said, service contract, just because there's a maintenance contract, we need to see that thing. If she says, oh, it's on a maintenance contract, I know it is. She also had her pump that was like sitting sideways inside the pump tank, that power doing nothing. So that one has several issues with the maintenance contract, and the home was 2 years old. Okay. But she didn't, she was brand new septic. Okay. But the majority of the companies are all saying, just because you hear service contract, that should probably make your alarm go off even more, rather than complicated. Okay. All right. I think, yeah. I think it's about an hour at a time. You guys got an hour. Well, there's probably more to it. I'm hoping that I, at least, because like I said, when we put these together, they're based off of problems that are running through with agents and how a lot of agents have been stung and like, oh, I'll never deal with the septic again, or, some of them have cut the teeth, unfortunately, when you use it and they burn them, and I'm just trying to prevent that. So I was like, man, we need to put something together to protect you guys. $295 for the actual inspection itself. Now, we don't. Okay. If you have, so that's a good question, and I was gonna cover this. When should you have an inspector septic versus a septic company have, inspect? The thing is that if it's a traditional system and it's never been pumped, it's gonna be convenient for you all to have the pumping company inspect it. Now, not all pumping companies will inspect, but then you have to run through the headache of trying to get me there and then there at the same time, and that's a huge headache. So if you're able to, at that point in time, have an inspection, have a septic company in your Rolodex there that does inspections and pumping, okay? And then now, of course, I always recommend Rachel septic, but they don't come down south here and stuff like that. So, if you're up north, Rainbow's a good place to use. If you're down south, you need to have like 3 or 4 in your wall. If it's an aerobic system and it's been just recently pumped or something like that, and the client is okay with that, those are good for inspectors to do. But again, pumping is the way to go. and, try to arrange to have it inspected, pumped at the same time. Okay, septics that are severely, negligent and stuff like that, again, pumping, it should always be done and inspection, if possible at the same time. And a lot of times people will say, hey, well, we'll have it pumped and it'll let them get there. That's okay too, but if it's an older system, I wanna see it before it's pumped and I wanna see it after it's pumped, because if it's a vacant home and I go there and it's, that septic is half full, well, where did it go? That's telling me there's possible leak there somewhere. So if I get there and it's sort of been pumped, then that takes that ability for me to be able to tell you if there's a hairline leak there somewhere, something like that. So.
And I'll just add, I'll remind everyone online too, that if you take a listing with a septic or start working with a buyer who's gonna look at septics, you can always order a copy of the original permit paperwork from the county. So there, every county has a little bit different process of ordering that paperwork, but like that's step number one, the minute I take a listing with a septic, I'm ordering all that paperwork, because I wanna know, what was originally permitted for, is it the same size of home that I'm trying to sell right now? Where is the septic located, finding out as much information as possible. I have a buyer right now who's buying, it doesn't even have a house on it, but it has a septic on it. And the seller won't pay for the septic pumping, and we can't even tell where anything is because it's so overgrown. It's an estate sale, and it can be a huge amount of money just to dig up and uncover and figure out where it was located. Yeah.
It looks like they're looking for that lost pot, like bag of money that somebody buried one time. You got all those holes in the yard, dug up everywhere, we're trying to locate that septic, hoping and stuff like that, that can become difficult.
Yeah.
If that septic, if you went there, and you don't know where that septic is, and there's no clean out, and there's no other, as I said, and from the state, no 3 day outs in there. Okay, because you will have to probe, you're gonna have to locate it, and those are probably something for a septic company.
Do you have a good recommendation for septic repair company?
Yeah, on my card, email me and I'll tell me what area that you're looking at, and I'll give you my referral for the south, north, all that stuff.
Can I add one thing that I forgot
Sure.
about the septic coverage, is it does include one pumping per year.
Oh.
Now, that doesn't mean that you just say, oh, I think I want it pumped, it means there is a required pumping, but that is included.
Wow. That almost pays for the warranty itself, because pumping is like $400 or $500.
When you were saying rainbow septic, there's the pump and the inspection.
Yeah, Rainbow for North Austin, Ground Rock, and the Georgia.
But
It does have trigger,
what you mean, like the pumping.
Yeah, that would be different, yeah.
That's great.
Now typically, if it's past due, you can usually get the seller to pay for that. But if it was just recently pumped, then a lot of times they can say, I'm not gonna pump it again.
I always
So one can rely on-
And I always say I'm the buyer to coordinate all of these things.
Yeah, there you go, too. That takes that headache off your.
Yeah.
Yep,
This is good.
yeah, now if you got any questions for me as far as inspector goes, this is where out of the CE portion, and now I can kind of say what I do and how often I do it.
Sign up, sign in anywhere.
Yes, for the CE.
Do you want to
Yeah.
see? So there's in the weekly one that I sent out yesterday, there's a link to pages.
Okay.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, then we take care of all, we will send in everything to start for you.
thank you very much.
As long as you register. Is everybody registered? Everybody registered? No, fine. If you want to see, you have to pay $5. I mean, just spray for it. If you want to see, it's free, but if you want to see, I gotta give it $5. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bill.
And I am available 6 days a week to, to inspect, do septic. If you have any questions